anniversary of 9/11 is less than a week away, and today a chilling confirmation about the conditions suffered by those brave men and women who toiled in the rubble after the Twin Towers fell. A new medical study concludes that the air they were breathing was toxic and in some cases deadly. And today the numbers released were even worse than thought. 70% of rescue workers now suffering from new or worsened breathing problems. All this despite assurances at the time that the air was safe to breathe. ABC's David Muir filed an exclusive report on this problem almost 6 months ago. Tonight, his update.
In his small New Jersey town, Joseph Zadroga picked up his granddaughter from daycare today. His daily routine for almost a year. He now plays the role of dad after his own son, New York City police detective James Zadroga, died after his recovery work at Ground Zero. Today, nearly 5 years after 9/11, doctors at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York revealed what Zadroga's father and so many other families have been trying to say for so long now, that the toxic air and debris at Ground Zero was lethal. Tens of thousands of brave first responders stood in it, dug from it, and sifted through it. And now so many of them are gravely ill from it.
I am here today to present sobering findings on the health impact of the disaster on 9,442 World Trade Center responders.
James Zadroga spent 16 hours a day for a month digging through the debris, searching for bodies. And soon after, the 30-year-old strapping dad quickly got sick.
He would be coughing, cough up, all kinds of debris out of his lungs.
And last January, while holding his little girl's bottle, he collapsed and died.
To watch your son die in front of you slowly, it was very difficult. It's the only time in my life that I was on antidepressants.
We talked with Zadroga's father earlier this year, the first television interview for a man who would typically shy away from something like this, but he had something to say. Convinced his son died from 9/11, he knew thousands of others were in desperate need of medical help, just as his son was. Soon after our talk, a New Jersey coroner confirmed it, writing the first autopsy report directly linking Zadroga's death to his work at Ground Zero. It is felt with reasonable degree of medical certainty that the cause of death in this case was directly related to 9/11. Zadroga's lung disease was the result of a history of exposure to toxic fumes and dusts.
I got it. See you out there, Tom.
And now today, after studying more than 9,000 first responders, doctors say nearly 70% of the recovery workers suffered from new or worsened respiratory problems. Among responders who had no health symptoms before the attacks, 61% developed lung problems. And a full 1/3 of first responders tested had abnormal breathing tests. For the families, finally a definitive answer.
There is no question in my mind that thousands of World Trade Center responders who made heroic sacrifices in the service of our nation are now sick as a result of that service.
And Dr. Robin Herbert admits her concern now turns to heightened cancer risks, usually not seen until 10 years down the road.
One of our biggest fears is that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg now in terms of health problems.
Even still, 5 years later, just the tip of the iceberg.
Even still.
And today, Joseph Zadroga told us that is precisely why he was asking all along that they do more than monitor his son, that they give him medical help.
Screaming at them, my son's dying here, and all you're doing is monitor. You want to monitor people. It's not helping him. We have the best doctors in the world in New York City, and yet we have none of these doctors working on the case. I couldn't understand that.
There were more than 24 families begging for medical help from the federal government, saying their loved ones were dying while waiting for help. There was Felix Hernandez, the 31-year-old Bronx EMT who died of respiratory failure nearly a year ago, and Timothy Keller, the Long Island EMT who first began coughing up bits of gravel. Judy Wolf is a mother and school aide from Wisconsin who immediately traveled to New York after 9/11 to help with victims at Ground Zero. She's been sick ever since.
I get the dry cough a lot. Chest tightness comes with the cough, get chest pains. I have sinus infections all the time. I get a rash that can't explain why it's there. I only get it from the face down. I cannot clean my home anymore because I can't use the cleaners. I can't go outside and garden in my garden because of the molds and mildews out there.
Now nearly 5 years after 9/11, and there is still uncertainty over who should pay for the medical treatment of the thousands of men and women who rushed here to Ground Zero to help out. Millions have been spent to monitor the patients, to study them, but New York lawmakers will point out that not one federal dollar has been spent to treat them.
It's only now, as we're approaching the 5th anniversary of 9/11, that our governments at all levels are saying, oh yes, we think there may be a connection.
Senator Clinton says $125 million has been earmarked for workers' compensation and treatment, but that it still sits in Washington. And in New York, the governor and New York City's mayor continue to battle over how much they should contribute.
It's time that our country stepped up and said we're going to take care of these people and try to provide the best possible medical care, and especially for the 40% who don't even have insurance.
And so many of these families would ask, though, why has it taken 5 years for this?
It's taken 5 years because we've had political leadership that refused to believe what was right in front of their noses.
In fact, just a week after September 11th, the EPA said air test results showed the public was not being exposed to excessive levels of asbestos and harmful substances. Earlier this year, the Bush administration appointed Dr. John Howard to coordinate treatment for first responders at Ground Zero. Today, his office told us he was unavailable to sit down with us, but he did have this to say to first responders.
If you're one of those 40,000 and you have not signed up for a screening appointment, please do.
Are these deaths 9/11 deaths?
Yes,
Well, absolutely.
When we first sat down with these sick first responders earlier this year, they told us they were tired of the political pageantry. Major Mike McCormick was caught up in it. He remembered the moment digging through the rubble below Tower 1 when he discovered a red swatch. He thought it was a woman's dress.
So myself and my team, we started digging like crazy to get out from under this beam, and it was the American flag that was actually flying on the towers as they came down.
McCormick and his crew were photographed by Vanity Fair with the flag. It traveled the country to the World Series and the Winter Olympics. He was considered a hero. Today, he told us he expects plenty of commemorations to mark the 5th anniversary of 9/11, but he said he would trade all of that for federal money to help his fellow first responders.
If you don't take care of the responders from 9/11, what does that show when the next disaster happens?
And so would Joseph Zadroga. When we first talked, he said his granddaughter would cry herself to sleep at night. Now those tears have been replaced with questions about her late father. Zadroga told me today his answer is simple. Your father was a hero. I'm David Muir for Nightline in New York.
Tomorrow at Ground Zero.